Hello and welcome to ABP Live. I have with me today India's former High Commissioner to Pakistan and also to Canada, a veteran diplomat, Mr. Ajay Bisaria. We are going to talk about his latest book, Anger Management, the Troubled Diplomatic Relations Between India and Pakistan. This is a complete page turner. Once you grab a book, a copy of it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. He's been in the thick of things when the Balakot strikes happened and also the Pulwama attacks. We'll discuss all of that. Welcome to ABP Live, sir. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Thank you, sir. So we'll straight away deep dive into, the issues that we have faced very recently. And you have enormously written about Pulwama and those, the episodes that have happened that have now come to define the India-Pakistan bilateral relationship. Now, the first thing now that we are going to approach, and we are going to approach the 5th anniversary of the Pulwama attacks, unfortunately. Looking back, how do you analyze it from your perspective? You were there in the thick of things. You were there in Pakistan. Do you think somewhere, would you call it a security or an intel failure? How do you define that?
Well, I would make the point that there have been incidents and tragic incidents like Pulwama all too often. And all too often these could be ascribed to cross-border terrorism, to groups from across the border. Each time you have a terrorist attack, of course, there is some failure in our security system somewhere which makes it possible. But we need to remember that this is also cross-border terrorism coming from an inimical power which is across our borders and from organizations like the Jaish-e-Mohammed or the Lashkar-e-Taiba which have mounted these attacks. So often by itself it's a tragedy, and it's also a security lapse if it happens. But nowhere in the world can you prevent terrorist attacks completely. While foolproof security would really mean that you have no terrorism, and foolproof security would mean you have no wars. So what we did have on the 14th of February 2019 at Pulwama was a major terrorist attack. But the point I make in my book is that our reaction to that attack marked a paradigm shift in the way we deal with sub-conventional warfare like terrorism or proxy warfare. And that meant that the reaction in Balakot, the airstrikes in Balakot, together with the surgical strikes after Uri in 2016, made the point that India had an answer to sub-conventional warfare and was willing to use it, that India had the capacity and will to react to terrorism in the sub-conventional space. And I think that was an important paradigm shift in the way India was countering terrorism and delegitimizing terrorism, which we had unfortunately not done in the past.
Sir, and also when you talk about the Pulwama chapter in your book, you do discuss the fact that even before Pulwama had happened, the discussions on counterterrorism was very much going on. You were there as the interlocutor with the Pakistanis. But when it happened, days before that, did you get any inputs that something like that the Jaish is planning? And also, afterwards, people said that this is all organic. He was a local Kashmiri boy. How do you address all of that?
Well, I think that was clearly proven to be wrong. It was not a local movement alone. This was part of a long-term policy of jihadism, terrorism that Pakistan has allowed its soil to be used for, at least in the last 3 decades. And the investigation by the NIA that went over 18 months, which produced 13,500 page charge sheet, which was filed in a Jammu court, that indicted 19 people, including 7 from Pakistan. So it was quite clear from that point in a couple of days, because Jaish-e-Mohammed owned up to that terrorism, and also through the investigation that it was clearly an example of cross-border terrorism.
So do you think this boy crossed over, or he was getting trained in Kashmir?
That's not the point. The point is that the Jaish-e-Mohammed did it, whether it used resources from across the border or used a local Kashmiri lad. That's really not so critical. The fact is that they are an organization that is using terrorism as a means to create trouble in Kashmir and elsewhere, and that they did mount this with the brain behind this whole operation in Pakistan, perhaps not just a non-state actor, but also a state actor.
Okay. So you also write in your book that, you were very much aware that after this, the Pakistan Foreign Ministry will probably summon you, but then you made a point that you will not be addressing that, and you came to Delhi. And then there were these discussions as to what steps India will take. And we eventually saw Balakot strikes happening. But the way you've described how you gave your briefings to CCS, were you at any point, were you told explicitly by the PMO that strikes will happen? I know from your book you have written that General Bipin Rawat told you that there could be some kinetic operation. But did you think, or were you told that actual airstrikes will be happening inside Pakistan?
Well, as you see in my book, I returned to India immediately after Pulwama. I was asked by the government of India to report immediately, and I had multiple conversations in India. I certainly had the sense of the mood of the country as well as the mood within the government of outrage at this act of terrorism, and a sense that something needs to be done.
Okay.
Now, exactly in what shape or form that would come was not told to me and should not be told to me, because I, in a need to know information kind of ecosystem, the Indian High Commissioner based in Pakistan need not be told operational details of what might happen.
Okay.
So the only point I allude to is the kind of conversations we had and the sense that something was about to happen. So when and in what shape exactly is something I was not aware of.
When it happens, and then eventually, subsequently, the Abhinandan episode, how were you dealing with the Pakistanis? I'm sure you were under a lot of pressure. You also had to go back. What was it that you were facing on a daily basis from them when the Balakot strikes happened?
Well,
in the aftermath of the strikes.
Yes. So I was in Delhi, and then, as you noted, right after Pulwama, after the Balakot strikes on 26th February, soon Pakistan took action, and what it felt was a retort. And after that, in the first week of March, I was back in Pakistan. So it was an episode where the feeling at that point was that there could be diplomatic conversations, that the kinetic action was behind us, but the diplomacy began. And I had the opportunity to have some very frank conversations with various interlocutors in Pakistan who were also attentive to what India was saying and thinking. So there were many conversations with the Pakistan government, with the Foreign Office, as well as teams related to Imran Khan and the army, in which we made very clear the sense of unhappiness in India at terrorism, and the fact that that was the number one issue, to curtail that terrorism. So I did have a number of conversations which I've described to give a flavor of the kind of post-Balakot mood in Pakistan. And remember, India had soon moved into an election kind of campaign period, but we continue to have those conversations in Pakistan to make it clear that India's threshold for tolerance for terrorism had gone down.
Sir, so let me also now ask you on the fact that, as you said, you were dealing with all this on a daily basis. Then 370 also happened. That was what we see as one of the most difficult and challenging period in the India-Pakistan relationship, much more than, we probably had it even during the wartime. Now, what is the sense that you were getting with the common Pakistanis there? The Balakot strikes, were they able to instill any kind of fear within the Pakistani setup, the army, the ISI?
Well, the Balakot strikes, I think, served to make it clear to Pakistan that if there was another Pulwama, there would be a Balakot definitely in response, and it could be much bigger than the Balakot that had happened earlier. So I think it entered Pakistan's calculus that there was a very high cost to terrorism mounted on India by tanzeems based in Pakistan, by militant groups based in Pakistan, and which it is clear to the world, clear to India, that those are supported by the Pakistan army. So I think this point was clear that there would be now less tolerance of terrorism from India, and therefore a situation could escalate. And if Pakistan permitted an act of terrorism in India, would it be ready for the consequences? So I think that was one feeling. The second feeling that came was that a rethink within the army was telling it that, is this worth it? Is this policy of 3 decades of using terrorism as an instrument against all neighbors, all Pakistan's neighbors, is it giving dividends? Is there a cost-benefit ratio that is helping Pakistan? And the answer was perhaps not, because Pakistan was being cornered in the Financial Action Task Force. It was in the grey list, in danger of getting into the blacklist. In the IMF program that Pakistan was going in for, tough terrorism or anti-terrorism conditions were being put, and global interlocutors were asking Pakistan that, why would you continue with such a policy? So I think for all those reasons, there was a rethink in this policy.
So, as you said, there was a rethink within the Pakistani army, but what about the tanzeems? Do they know now that, if there is another Pulwama, God forbids, but then the reaction by India will be much more harder than the Balakot strikes?
Yes, absolutely. So it's entered Pakistan's security calculus. And as we've seen, the militant organizations also get their signals from the army and the ISI for mounting these terrorist attacks. So therefore, when the cost of it will be very high, it would be, hopefully, you would have a situation where the minders of these organizations, these militant organizations, start prevailing upon them to stop this action. Because, it's been said before that the Lashkar and Jaish are veritable arms of the ISI. So clearly, if there is a will in the Pakistan state to curb terrorism, it can be curbed.
So now coming to the Abhinandan chapter, now there is also a lot of discussion whether it was the, Pakistani goodwill gesture, as you written in your book, that they could not afford to keep him captivated because of the Geneva Convention. But what is it that, you did behind the curtains to get, Abhinandan freed? And also what we were discussing, and these 2 questions into one, sir. In India, there was this feeling, and also globally, that there can be a war can start immediately. How was that also prevented?
So, what I've demonstrated in the book with evidence of the diplomatic conversations was that at that point, India's coercive diplomacy and a credible threat of force worked in having the pilot released. Because the conversation in Pakistan was also, in some sections of the media and some analysts, saying that the pilot should be used as a bargaining chip, that Pakistan should bargain with India on various issues based on the presence of the pilot. Now, even apart from the Geneva Convention, which requires prisoners of war not to be harmed and to be returned as soon as possible, there was a good deal of diplomacy that took place, and I have demonstrated that in my narrative, that there was a lot of conversation that India had with Pakistan. Pakistan feared that India was about to escalate the situation. It had raised these issues with foreign diplomats, and also there was a discussion, a closed door discussion in Pakistan's parliament, where the Prime Minister was not present, but the Foreign Minister Qureshi and the Chief of Army Staff General Bajwa were present to brief the parliamentarians. And as one parliamentarian reported on camera in Parliament later, Ayaz Sadiq, he said that when Qureshi reported this, his legs were shaking, there was sweat on his brow,
yeah.
and he said, for God's sake, let's release the pilot because we don't know what India will do. So I cite all these pieces of evidence, the diplomacy, the conversation with foreign diplomats and others, to say that Pakistan took India's message seriously. And we were aware in advance that Imran Khan would make a speech in Parliament where he would offer to send the pilot back the next day. And that's precisely what happened. So I cite this as an example of successful diplomacy by India and successful use of a credible threat of force to get an outcome which India wanted at that point, which was to get the pilot back unharmed as soon as possible.
But did the Geneva Convention kick in, sir? Because it was not really a war situation. So what kind of dialogues did you have with the Pakistanis to tell them? I mean, my point is they could have kept him, no, if they wanted to.
No, so if you see a precedent of this in 1999, when a flight lieutenant Nachiketa was also downed, his plane was downed and he was held prisoner. He was returned in eight days. So he spent 8 days in custody. And
that was during the Kargil time.
During the Kargil time. And he was, finally returned, and we had intervened with the Red Cross and got him back. I think the important point here is that the Geneva Conventions demand that the prisoner is not harmed. Because if a pilot is downed, you would return that citizen of India to India or to any other country with whom you have a kind of skirmish situation. So what happened in this case is that the Geneva Conventions also demand that the pilot is unharmed. And what worried India initially was that some very vulgar, gloating videos of his with a bloodied nose and were put on social media, clearly by Pakistan's agencies. So that is not something that is done when you treat prisoners of war with basic respect. And the point I make was that India was asking Pakistan to respect the Geneva Conventions and return the pilot, and which is the outcome we eventually had. And I point out, not because of Pakistan's love for the Geneva Conventions, but because of the various implications of not returning him.
Sir, but then what do you make of the subsequent videos where he's drinking tea, praising the tea? Do you think that he did under coercion?
Well, clearly he was a prisoner, and clearly prisoners are made to do things when in captivity that are not in their control. So I don't have any specific knowledge of whether there was a gun pointing at him at that point or not. But what really is the issue here is the bigger one, which is that he was returned within a short period of time. And he was returned for reasons that went beyond the Geneva Protocols.
So now coming to the fact that after that, 370 happened, and then we saw the rhetoric that started, and unfortunately, diplomatic ties were also downgraded, which had you coming back to India. But I remember at that point of time, I mean, we were sort of trying to connect with you, and you were also having a lot of facing a very difficult time. India also at that time didn't want diplomatic ties to be downgraded. Do you think that was a very rash decision taken by the Imran Khan government? It shouldn't have been so?
Well, I think in hindsight, from Pakistan's point of view, also it was an overreaction, because the what Article 370 did was that it changed an internal administrative arrangement. It was not changing the borders, and Pakistan was not directly affected. There was no change in its locus standi on this occasion, on this situation. And Pakistan has complained through the 50s, from the 50s, about Article 370 being not something that is acceptable to them, or is a kind of fake thing in their view, which need not have been put in, or was not really giving autonomy to Jammu and Kashmir. But the developments, I think, were such that they overreacted. And the army, in fact, the army spokesman tried to correct the statements being made by the civilian politicians at that point, to say, when they said that this should be reversed, the army was pointing out that we don't recognize it anyway, the Article 370. But I think the short point from a diplomatic strategic point of view is that Pakistan overreacted to that situation. Part of the reason is that Imran Khan was inexperienced, and the army was not intervening too much in the way he was handling the situation, because General Bajwa was up for an extension and therefore didn't want to interfere too much in that process, because his position was tenuous. So I think what happened was an overreaction and a removal of the diplomatic space for coming back to the table and having a dialogue, which it was a sort of squandered opportunity, I think, on Pakistan's part.
So now coming, what is happening right now, we do hear a lot that, normalcy has returned to Kashmir. Tourism is happening. But how do you see the situation now that we are seeing with Rajouri Poonch in the Jammu sector, and the fact that what we get to hear from the army sources is that entire Pir Panjal range has been sort of compromised. There are tunnels dug in it. Do you think that with 370, even the Tanzeems have now changed their strategy, and we need to sort of innovate, or the counter-infiltration grid that we have in Jammu Kashmir, that also needs to be reviewed? How do you view this?
Yes, certainly. I think what happened in terms of how India reacted was, after 370, was a very effective counter-terrorism and counter-infiltration grid was put in place, which prevented a good deal of violence from happening. Over a period of time, we have, touchwood, gone 5 years without a major terrorist incident like Pulwama. But we don't have a situation of zero cross-border terrorism.
Right.
We still have a changed tactics, using of drones and so on. So we've seen not, I think, a complete stoppage in terrorism, but as an analyst, I would say Pakistan is perhaps operating below India's threshold of response. So smaller incidents affecting a smaller number of security people mostly, they are trying to mount in what they perceive as India's vulnerable or weak spots. So we haven't seen the end of terrorism. We've seen the change in tactics, but we also haven't seen an appetite to escalate the level to a Pulwama kind of attack. So I think what India is doing is strengthening its defenses, strengthening the weak and vulnerable points, and that is what should be our strategy. But I think what happened with Pakistan is that it went into a default position after Article 370 of similarly questioning, resuming the terrorism, rather than going ahead and making a strategic move to end terrorism using these tanzeems.
And how do you see the situation within Pakistan right now? So, I mean, you've been there, you've dealt with them. In what state of panic do you think they are right now in, with handling TTP at on one side, and now the Iran strikes? Although they have diffused the tensions, but Iran has very clearly made a point that we can also, give you a befitting reply, sort of a thing. Do you think that the Pakistani army, ISI now, should reduce probably their focus on India and see more on its, the other trouble that are sort of brewing there?
Well, it seems to be the case that suddenly India is not enemy number one. India is perhaps enemy number three, because Iran suddenly emerged this week as the major adversary, and Afghanistan has been for a while with the TTP. But I think what this situation with Iran underlines are two important factors. One is that Pakistan is being seen by almost all its neighbors as a major terrorist haven, giving kind of safe havens to terrorists which are active in those countries. So all of Pakistan's neighbors are seeing it. And secondly, they feel it is legitimate to go in hot pursuit of these within Pakistan. So while Iran did it with the Jaish al-Adl base in Balochistan, Afghanistan said that they should have done it 20 years ago with the Quetta Shura, which Pakistan was promoting within its territory. And you've heard these similar conversations there. So all of Pakistan's neighbors are being troubled by this policy of providing safe havens to terrorist groups active in their countries. And this is something Pakistan should take note of and try to reimagine this policy, because it's obviously not helping them make friends in the neighborhood.
So, but then what does this also tell you about the state of Pakistani military? I mean, we did a Balakot strike, India did, then Iran did this. There was recently an attack in one of their air bases also. Do you think their military or their air defense, entire military apparatus, is it sort of weakening because of the internal domestic political turmoil?
Well, this is for military analysts to judge whether the operational capabilities are compromised. But clearly the army is under a lot of stress because of all these actions. And don't forget that apart from the neighbors, they also face it from the United States.
Yes.
So when Osama bin Laden was taken out in 2011 by the US, that was clearly something that the US initiated as an action that you could take in a country where harboring terrorists. And after that, the drone program of the United States as well. Now, Pakistan chooses to respond to the other neighbors whom it feels it can give this retort to, but not to the United States. So there was no removal of the US ambassador, nor was there any attempt at talking of retaliation for what happened with Osama bin Laden. So I think what it also shows, and this is the commentary we are seeing in military blogs and so on, is the air defense capacities are not as strong as they should be. These are the conversations going on within Pakistan as well. But it's hard for me to make that judgment, but I can only say, as an analyst of the diplomacy and the strategy, that the neighbors of Pakistan are all exasperated by the safe havens given to terrorists, and they wish to take direct action because Pakistan is refusing to do so.
And my last question to you, sir, I know you have a very busy schedule. This is the election year for both India as well as Pakistan. I'm sure you've done a deep research on, on what is probably going to happen, but if in Pakistan we see a return of the Sharif government, and if we see a return of the Modi government, can we also foresee any kind of rapprochement, or you think there could be some dialogue that would start? How do you analyze the bigger picture?
Well, in both cases, instead of if, people are saying when. So when we have that situation, and you're right, I think we will have a situation of two governments and a coincidence of these two governments coming together almost at around the same time, within a few months of each other. And I have pointed out in my book that the fresh elections in both countries are occasion for fresh thinking. And on this relationship, and when the two civilian governments come together, there is an additional reason to do some fresh thinking. We also would have gone for a long time without a major terrorist attack. We also would have a situation in Pakistan, given all indications that this would be a military supported government, led by Nawaz Sharif, or personally or through one of his supporters. So in whichever scenario, we have a situation where I think everything is coming together propitiously, barring an accident like a terrorist attack, which hopefully the army will control. You can have a situation where we could have some cautious optimism about moving forward and taking some baby steps forward in building trust enough to take this relationship to a place where India and Pakistan have a structured conversation to improve this relationship.
So I remember the line that you wrote in your book, that I should not be the last High Commissioner to Pakistan. When you wrote that, it means that you still have hopes that these two countries can move ahead, right?
Absolutely, I think so. And even the history shows that it's a cyclical process of ups and downs. And right now we're going through a low period. But in this relationship, things change very, very fast. And leadership matters. So if we have the sort of leaders who want to take the relationship forward on both sides, then there is a possibility that after elections in both countries, there would be an appetite for looking for a way forward.
Sure, thank you so much, sir. That was our former High Commissioner to Pakistan, Mr. Ajay Bisaria. Do grab a copy of the book, Anger Management, the Troubled Diplomatic Relationship between India and Pakistan. Be rest assured you've not read so many things as you would get in this book. Thank you for watching this. For ABP Live, this is Nayanima Basu, with me on camera, Sanchit.